Does a horror movie have to be scary? When I was looking up something for this movie on IMDb, I happened upon a commentator giving this movie 2 stars out of 10 because, quote, it wasn't scary. Now that kind of bothered me a little bit. So I did a admittedly very limited poll on this channel, and I was surprised at the results. As of this recording, 80% of the people that were polled said that yes, a horror movie should be scary to be considered good. Now that honestly shocks me because having that as the main barometer for a horror movie seems a little unfair. After all, scary is subjective, and that also completely removes so many other emotions and components that capture your attention in a film. Now, I understand the idea of a horror movie being scary in the same way that a comedy should be funny or an action movie should have action. But I don't feel like it should be binary in that way. It's a scale, and that scale should slide everywhere. Now, a comedy can range from quirky and entertaining to having to pause the film because you need to catch your breath from laughing. But both movies can be considered good comedies, just different styles of them. I mean, every single action movie isn't Mission Impossible or Raid 2, and that's a good thing. Spectrums are good. The same is true for horror film. Yes, some will frighten you to the core and keep you up at night, but some will just introduce disturbing themes or storylines that may not keep the lights on when you go to bed, but will still stay with you for days. Now, should that be looked at as a lesser horror film? I don't think so. I always prefer to replace the term scary with effective. Is it scary? I mean, who knows? Everyone's mileage will be different. But is it effective in what it's trying to say or do? Does it affect me in some way? For me, that gets more to the heart of the matter than the term scary. And I think that speaks more as a whole of all the elements that go into a film. For instance, movies that are scary are always effective, but effective movies don't have to be scary to be memorable or good. Disappear Completely is a 2024 Mexican movie about a photographer who gets cursed and begins to lose his senses. The movie itself centers around Santiago, a news photographer who's a real hustler. He pays off cops to give him tips, he listens to police radios, he arrives at the crime scene before anyone else, he uses fake passes and stories to get past anyone he hasn't already bribed, and he always seems to get exclusive pictures of the crime scenes as a result. And it's his unwavering drive in this that allows him to get the shots he wants, regardless as to how extreme they are. So he works all night and comes home just in time to edit them and send them off to his editor so that he can crash, only to see in the morning that the editor just changes his photos prior to printing because of that same problem with them being a little too extreme. However, what he really wants is an exhibition to show his photography and to be taken seriously as an artist. Unfortunately, the galleries don't seem to be interested in his portfolio, and he's routinely rejected by them, mostly because of the extreme nature of his photos. Anyway, one night, Santiago gets a tip about a politician that has been found lying in his house. He then leaves a planned date that he has with his wife in order to chase down this story. Of course, he gets to the crime scene a little bit too late and has to break into the house because there's no way he's missing this opportunity. So Santiago gets to work taking pictures of this politician lying dead on the floor. However, during his picture taking, he realizes the man is actually still alive. At the same time, he hears something in the house and accidentally snaps a picture of said noise. On his way back to his car, he's then knocked out and his camera stolen. However, luckily for him, he still has the memory card, and so he's able to get home and send those photos off to the editor in time for printing and publication, narrowly avoiding disaster. I mean, aside from the stolen camera thing. Strange things then start happening to Santiago, one of which is he starts to hallucinate while he's on the job taking pictures of his next subject. And he also notices that he starts to lose both his sense of taste and smell. He immediately begins to panic and goes to a doctor, but all medical checkups come in clean, and so a mental cause is believed to be the problem. And with his wife of 14 years revealing that she's pregnant, that seems like the likely cause here. But as Santiago learns more about that hospitalized politician and his symptoms, he fears there's something a lot more serious happening to him. Now, I don't want to go too much more into the plot of this movie because it begins to unfold in some ways that you'd probably expect and some that I don't think you would. However, I really enjoyed the way this film was laid out. The mood and atmosphere here are excellent. It's unsettling, but it's not constantly trying to beat you over the head with foreboding images or imagery in general. I mean, I guess begrudgingly, I kind of would have to agree with that reviewer that technically I didn't find this movie very scary, although there was scary imagery. But the rest of it is done well enough where, to be honest, I just didn't really care. The story's fascinating and the pacing here moves pretty well throughout most of the film, and yet it spends time in places where it should. It's patient because it's a journey, and it really feels like one. The acting, production design, and general craft here is top notch. In short, it was effective. The phrase that kept coming up for me while watching this movie was attention to detail. This movie really excelled in some of the little things that I think allows it to rise above. Sometimes the difference between an okay movie and a good movie is just a few seemingly simple moments. But they, either consciously or unconsciously, really can set a tone. This movie does just that. From the use of the visual aspect ratio to the clever way that it puts you inside the main character of Santiago as he begins to experience this curse. Great scenes in movies don't exist inside of a vacuum. Hundreds of moments are built upon each other, hopefully, in a way that'll pay off these scenes as intended. And these small moments may not be obvious, but they're there and they're needed. Like, here's a small moment in this movie that I thought was one of those instances. Okay, that feels like nothing, right? And the music cuts out. Well, so what? But there's just something about the choice of music, being classical music, just sort of dropping, that immediately sort of puts this small sense of unease. It's not obvious, and there's nothing in the movie at that moment that should make us feel uneasy, but it does. And that's just a little tick. It's the giant cruise ship turning by small degrees. Attention to detail. And one more thing I wanted to mention, there was potentially a few nods to that movie Seven. Aside from the classical music, there was a very similar opening credit sequence montage and their use of displaying the days of the week as the movie kind of went along. And I'm actually curious if that was an intentional thing or not. Now, the last thing I want to talk about in a general sense before I hit the spoiler section is the general concept of character arcs versus story arcs. Now, for my money, story arcs are king. If you can also throw a character arc in there, so much the better. And technically, neither are 100% needed. It's really just dependent on the movie itself. But for the most part, I think it's important to at least have the story arc. For instance, in Jaws, right? It has both the story arc of the shark that's being killed, spoiler alert, and the character Brody no longer being afraid of the water. Pearl has the resolution of both her situation and her ascension into a killer. Exorcist not only resolves the little girl that's possessed, but from a character perspective, Father Damien Karras overcomes his crisis of faith and fully embraces it by sacrificing himself to get rid of the demon. Alien, The Vigil, The Conjuring, Jesus, even Tucker and Dale versus Evil all have both. On the other side of that, a movie like Predator mostly just has a story arc with the dispatching of the Predator. Although you could say there's a minor character arc for Dutch where he realizes there's something more powerful out there than himself and learns a bit of humility. But, since he wasn't really a brash asshole to start with, it's a minor arc. But it could be there if you want to argue it. Something in the Dirt, on the other hand, has neither. Both characters change throughout the course of the movie, but with one of them dying and the other one giving up because of it, neither story or character arc are actually completed, which is kind of the point of the movie. Now, this movie, and it's the only thing that really dropped its grade for me from an A and prevented me from fully being on board, has a great character arc. But the story arc kind of drops the ball. All right, let's get into spoilers. Now, once Santiago realizes that the politician may be a sign of what's to come for him, and he finds a very odd object in his kitchen, he seeks out a local shaman of sorts and asks what it is. He's told that it's a very powerful curse and recommends that he goes to an expert. Now, this expert will also cost him about $6,000. He, of course, resists at first. However, once he loses his sense of touch, he realizes that money is not an object here, sells everything, and has to take part in a very dark ritual in order to rid him of this curse. So the two big questions that I had as this story was building that I wanted an answer to was, why was Santiago cursed in the first place? And what does the person who cursed him want? Now, as he had to make some real tough choices and sacrifices beyond just monetarily in order to get rid of this curse, or at least attempt to get rid of this curse, it seemed like the movie was really building towards this type of conclusion. So I was really on board and interested on the outcome. However, when the ritual doesn't work to free him from the curse, and he realizes that he accidentally may have gotten a picture of the person who cursed him, he's in a bit of a race against time to find the man responsible before he loses his last two senses. Now, this is where my disappointment comes in, and the whole story arc versus character arc comes up. In the beginning of the film, Santiago is passionate and willing to make sacrifices for his job, but his home life is falling by the wayside. His wife of 14 years, Marcy, gets pregnant, and he just wants her to get rid of it. Basically saying that his job is too important right now, he's got too much to do, there's no time, there's no money. However, once he finds the person responsible for the curse, which ends up being a very powerful witch of sorts, I'm not really sure exactly what it is, they don't mention it, so I'm just going to call him a witch. But he's given the option of either lifting the curse or sacrificing his unborn child. Now, this is where it puts his character arc kind of in great question, and in the last few moments, he decides that his wife and family is more important than him, and essentially takes one for the team. Now, this is a great character arc, but as a story conclusion, I found it really lacking. What was the point of all of this? Like, why did he get cursed in the first place, and why would the witch want his unborn child? What if his wife hadn't gotten pregnant? If the reason he was cursed in the first place was because there's a record of this person on a media card, and that was the reason, and that can't happen, then why not ask for that? What does his unborn child have to do with anything? And to be clear, there's nothing wrong with the character arc and the decision that he made. It ends up being a bit of a tragedy, but that sudden shift felt like a pulling out of the rug on what was a building story of why. I just felt a little cheated because that child thing feels so out of left field. I mean, I guess the idea is to sacrifice something you love, but I still don't understand the reasons and the motivation for the witch in the first place. Like, let's say he did sacrifice his child, gets his senses back. Presumably, he would just still have the pictures and his job, so this wouldn't resolve any problem for the witch, right? So I just felt it all comes off as a little too convenient and something almost lifted from a different movie, especially since it had been building up so nicely all along. Well, just to wrap this up, despite some disappointment with how I felt they decided to conclude this story, I really recommend this film. It's patient, fascinating, with excellent direction, acting, and that attention to detail, which is able to work its way under your skin in a great way, whether or not it's actually quote-unquote scary. I'd give this movie a B+. But I actually want to hear two things from you this time. One, I'd love to hear what you thought about this movie. Two, but what do you think about the idea of a movie has to be scary to be considered good? Do you feel the same way? Is there a gray area in there, or is it has to scare me in order for me to like it? Anyway, let me know in the comments below.